She hugged a crying man in an alley. He was the groom left at the altar. A very beautiful, heartwarming, and passionate love story. Don't miss a single second. If you don't like the introduction, you can skip it and start reading the story. Hi, my very beautiful, great, loyal, and worth more than gold and diamond family. How are you, my precious ones? May your hearts be filled with love, joy, and unshakable peace. A powerful prayer for my beautiful family. Heavenly Father, I come before you with gratitude for my precious family. Bless them with strength, peace, and endless joy. Remove every burden, open doors of success, and let their hearts be filled with love. Protect them from all harm. Guide their steps, and let miracles unfold in their lives. May they rise higher, walk in victory, and never lack anything. In Jesus' name, amen. My beautiful family, yesterday I received fewer likes, comments, and shares on my video. I specially request you, please like, comment, and share this video as much as you can. Are you satisfied with me? Let me know in the comments. And tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city name in the comments. I'm taking attendance, so comment I am present. And don't forget our challenge, 20,000 subscribers, only 4 days left. Let's start with love. We will survive and we will rise again. Drop your love in the comments if you believe it. Let's go, my family. We are unstoppable. Chapter 1. The Abandoned Groom. The Cathedral of St. Michael glowed with the warm light of 1,000 candles. Peonies and roses cascaded from every available surface, their scent hanging heavy in the air. 1,000 guests filled the pews, the crème de la crème of society, dressed in their finest attire. At the altar, Kieran Matthews stood tall in his bespoke tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, his shoulders squared with the confidence of a man about to claim everything he'd ever wanted. The string quartet transitioned to Pachelbel's canon. The massive oak doors opened. Rebecca appeared, a vision in white silk and antique lace. A collective intake of breath rippled through the cathedral as she glided down the aisle, her face partially obscured by her veil. Kieran's chest swelled with pride. This moment represented everything he'd worked toward, the perfect match, the perfect life, the perfect future his father had mapped out for him since childhood. Rebecca reached the altar, her hand trembling. Slightly as Kieran took it in his own, the bishop began the ceremony, his voice resonating through the sacred space. The familiar words washed over Kieran like a benediction until the moment arrived for them to exchange their vows. Kieran spoke clearly, confidently, pledging his life to the woman before him. When he finished, Rebecca's turn came. She lifted her face to his, and for the first time he saw the truth in her eyes, a cold uncertainty that sent ice through his veins. "Rebecca," he whispered, too quietly for anyone but her to hear. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. Then, louder, so that her voice carried to the front rows, she said, "I can't." 2 simple words, yet they shattered the cathedral's reverent silence like a gunshot. "I can't do this," she repeated, her voice stronger now as she stepped back from him, creating a physical distance that mirrored the chasm suddenly opening between them. Murmurs erupted throughout the cathedral. Camera flashes popped like lightning, capturing the moment for posterity and public consumption. In the front row, Kieran's father, William Matthews, rose halfway from his seat, his face contorted with fury and disbelief. Rebecca turned away, dropping her bouquet at Kieran's feet. The cathedral blurred around him as she walked. Not ran, but walked with deliberate steps, back down the aisle. Each click of her heels against the marble floor echoed like a death knell for his dignity. Instinct finally propelled Kieran forward. He rushed after her, barely registering the gasps and whispers that followed him. Outside, the spring sunshine mocked the darkness spreading through his chest. Rebecca was already at the limousine, its door held open by the chauffeur, whose face, remained professionally impassive despite the drama unfolding. "Rebecca!" Kieran called, his voice breaking. "Wait!" She paused, 1 foot already inside the vehicle. When she turned, her expression held something worse than anger or disdain. It held pity. "Was any of it real?" he demanded, advancing until they stood, face to face. "All this time, all these months, was it all a lie?" Rebecca sighed, a sound so small yet devastating in its finality. "I'm sorry, Kieran. I thought I could do this. I really tried to make myself want this life." "Make yourself want this? Make yourself want me, you mean?" The realization struck him like a physical blow. "You never loved me." "I wanted to," she replied, her composure perfect even in this moment of destruction. "You're everything anyone should want, but I just—" She glanced away. "I can't pretend anymore." Before he could respond, she slipped into the limousine, the door closing with a soft, expensive thud. Through the tinted window he caught a glimpse of her removing her veil, her movements efficient, as though erasing him from her life was simply another task to complete. The car pulled away, crushing the scattered rose petals beneath its tires. Kieran stood immobile as the limousine disappeared around the corner. Behind him, the cathedral doors opened as guests began to emerge, hungry for details of the scandal. He couldn't face them, couldn't face the mixture of sympathy and fascination that would greet him. Instead, he turned and walked in the opposite direction, ripping off his bow tie and shoving it into his pocket. He walked for hours, directionless. As the perfect spring day faded into evening, his phone vibrated constantly until its battery died. The fashionable streets gave way to less manicured neighborhoods. Rain began to fall, softly at first, then with increasing intensity. Kieran welcomed it, letting it soak through his expensive suit, plaster his hair to his forehead, wash away the lingering scent of cathedral incense and Rebecca's perfume. As darkness fell completely, the emotional shock that had numbed him began to wear off. Reality crashed in, the humiliation, the rejection, the very public failure. His legs gave way in a narrow alley between two buildings. He slumped against a brick wall, sliding down until he sat on the wet pavement, knees drawn to his chest. For the first time since childhood, Kieran Matthews broke down completely, his body convulsing with sobs that tore from deep within his chest. He didn't notice the woman until she was standing directly before him, her scrubs partially visible. Beneath her raincoat, an umbrella tilted to shield them both. While others had hurried past the alley, averting their eyes from the well-dressed man clearly in crisis, she stopped. Celine Crawford had spent her day in the pediatric intensive care unit, making life-or-death decisions for other people's children. She recognized true suffering when she saw it. Without a word, she knelt beside him, heedless of the puddles soaking through her pants. She didn't ask questions or offer platitudes. She simply placed her umbrella on the ground and opened her arms, an invitation, not an imposition. Kieran stared at her through swollen eyes. In this stranger's face, he saw no judgment, no curiosity, only a calm compassion that reached through his despair. With a shuddering breath, he leaned forward, allowing himself to be embraced. Celine held him firmly, one hand moving to the back of his neck in a gesture both protective and grounding. His forehead dropped to her shoulder, his body surrendering to the simple human comfort she offered. The rain continued to fall around them, creating a curtain that separated this moment from the rest of the world. "Breathe," she whispered, the first word spoken between them. "Just breathe." Kieran inhaled deeply, drawing air into lungs that felt crushed beneath the weight of his shattered expectations. In the arms of this stranger, on this rain-soaked night that should have been his wedding night, he found the first, fragile moment of peace. Not healing, not yet, but the essential stillness needed for healing to eventually begin. Neither of them knew it then, but this chance encounter in the darkness would become the foundation upon which both their lives would be rebuilt. For now, there was only this, two strangers connected by compassion, the rain washing away the past, making space for whatever might come next. Chapter 2. Unexpected Connection. "You're shivering." These were Celine's first words to Kieran. After they'd sat in silence for nearly 20 minutes, her arms still around his shoulders, his breathing gradually steadying beneath her touch. The rain had lessened to a gentle patter, but both were thoroughly soaked. "I know a place," she continued, her voice low and steady. "Just around the corner, warm lights, strong coffee, no questions asked." Kieran looked up, really seeing her for the first time. Dark hair pulled back in a practical knot, intelligent eyes, the slight shadows beneath them suggesting the long hours of her profession. Her scrubs peeked out from beneath her raincoat, pale blue with the logo of Mercy General Hospital embroidered on the pocket. "Why are you helping me?" His voice emerged rough, unfamiliar to his own ears. Celine's smile held no pity, only a simple human kindness. "I'm a doctor. I can't walk past someone in pain." She stood, offering her hand. After a moment's hesitation, Kieran took it, allowing her to pull him to his feet. The world tilted briefly, exhaustion and emotional trauma taking their toll. Celine's hand immediately steadied his elbow, her professional assessment evident in her gaze. "When did you last eat?" The question struck Kieran as absurdly normal, a mundane concern amid catastrophe. "Breakfast, I think. There was supposed to be a reception." His voice trailed off. Celine nodded, understanding without requiring explanation. "Food first, then." The cafe she led him to was a small establishment tucked between a bookshop and a vintage record store. The windows glowed amber against the blue-black evening, promising warmth and anonymity. Inside, mismatched furniture created intimate islands of privacy. The few patrons were absorbed in books or laptops, paying no attention to the bedraggled newcomers. "Samir?" Celine called quietly to the barista, a young man with kind eyes who greeted her with obvious familiarity. "2 coffees, please. And whatever's warm in the kitchen." She guided Kieran to a corner table, partially concealed by a bookshelf. Under the warm lights, she saw the full devastation in his face, the face that had appeared on society pages and business magazines, now unrecognizable in its vulnerability. She didn't comment on his identity, offering instead the mercy of treating him simply as another human being in distress. "I'm Selene, by the way," she said, shrugging off her wet raincoat. "Kieran?" He'd almost added Matthews, but the surname felt suddenly burdensome, weighted with expectations he'd failed to fulfill. Samir brought their coffees and 2 bowls of fragrant soup with crusty bread. The simple food grounded Kieran in the present moment, each spoonful pulling him further from the abyss. By the time they'd finished eating, his shivering had stopped, and the catastrophic events of the day had receded just enough to allow coherent thought. When Kieran reached for his wallet to pay, he discovered it missing, lost during his aimless wandering, or perhaps left behind at the cathedral. The realization crystallized his humiliation. Dropped at the altar, wandering the streets like a vagrant, and now unable to pay for a simple meal. He felt his face burn with shame. Celine's response changed everything. She laughed, not unkindly, but with a lightness that momentarily lifted the heaviness surrounding them. "Well," she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners, "now you'll have to see me again, if only to settle your coffee debt." The unexpected humor broke through Kieran's shock, eliciting the ghost of a smile. "I always pay my debts." "I'm counting on it." She paid Samir, then scribbled her number on a napkin. "For when you're ready to make good on that." "I don't know how to thank you," Kieran said, pocketing the napkin carefully. "Don't thank me yet. The coffee was mediocre at best." Her gentle teasing normalized the abnormal, offering him a lifeline back to ordinary human interaction. Outside, the rain had stopped. Celine hailed a taxi, insisting on seeing him safely to his home despite his protests. As the cab pulled up to his penthouse building, she didn't comment on the obvious wealth it represented. "Will you be all right?" she asked, her professional concern evident. Kieran considered lying, then decided she deserved his honesty. "No, not tonight, but maybe tomorrow." She nodded, understanding the truth of recovery, not a destination, but a direction. Tomorrow, then, one day at a time. As the taxi pulled away, Kieran stood watching until its taillights disappeared. Only then did he enter his building, nodding mechanically to the doorman, who discreetly avoided mentioning his disheveled appearance, or the day's very public events. Inside his penthouse, evidence of his wedding preparations assaulted him, Rebecca's favorite flowers arranged in anticipation of bringing her home as his wife, champagne chilling, the suitcases packed for their Maldives honeymoon. He ignored it all, stripping off his ruined clothes and standing under the shower until the hot water ran cold. Sleep eluded him. At dawn, he found himself on his balcony, watching the city awaken beneath him. His phone, newly charged, exploded with notifications, concerned messages from friends, business associates demanding updates on deals that had hinged on his marriage alliance with Rebecca's family, voicemails from his father radiating fury and disappointment. Among them all, only one message caught his attention, an unknown number. "Breathing helps, one breath at a time." Celine. He hadn't given her his number. She must have programmed it into her phone while he was paying for the taxi. The simple message contained no platitudes, no demands for explanation, no thinly veiled curiosity. Just practical advice from someone who understood suffering. 3 days later, as video of his wedding disaster trended online, as tabloids speculated wildly about Rebecca's reasons for leaving him, as his father's calls became increasingly threatening, Kieran finally responded to Celine's text, "I owe you coffee, and about 1,000 breaths." Her reply came within minutes, "I accept payment in both currencies." He called her that evening, intending only to arrange a meeting to repay her kindness, perhaps buy her dinner as thanks. Instead, they talked for hours. In her voice, calm, occasionally humorous, utterly without agenda, Kieran found a respite from judgment, a space where his pain didn't define him completely. "Do you make a habit of rescuing strangers?" he asked toward the end of their conversation. "Only the ones who look like they might be worth saving," she replied, and though he couldn't see her, he could hear the smile in her voice, not flirtatious, but warmly human. For the first time, since Rebecca had walked away from him, Kieran felt a quiet spark of something that wasn't pain, not hope, not yet, but the possibility that hope might, someday, return. Chapter 3. Healing Rhythms. 2 weeks after the wedding that wasn't, Kieran and Celine met at Lakeside Park, far from the upscale neighborhoods where Kieran might be recognized. The early morning mist still clung to the water, creating a private world where they walked side by side, their breath visible in the cool spring air. "I didn't Google you," Celine said, after they'd greeted each other with the slight awkwardness of people who have shared intimacy before formality, though your face was hard to avoid on every news site and tabloid. "Thank you for that." Kieran's voice held genuine gratitude. Since their phone conversation, he'd endured an onslaught of false sympathy and invasive questions. Celine's straightforward approach felt like oxygen after suffocation. "I should warn you," she continued, "I'm coming off a 36-hour shift. If I start speaking in medical abbreviations or fall asleep mid-sentence, just push me into the lake." The mental image startled a laugh from Kieran. a rusty sound he barely recognized as his own. "I'd have to jump in after you. Saving your life seems like the least I could do to repay the favor." They settled into a comfortable rhythm, circling the lake as the city awakened around them. Gradually, Kieran found himself speaking of things he'd told no one else. The humiliation that cut deeper than the heartbreak. The business deals complicated by his personal disaster, the suffocating weight of his father's disappointment. "The wedding was his idea, you know," Kieran admitted as they paused to watch a family of ducks navigate the water. "Not the marriage exactly, but the spectacle of it. A Matthew's wedding must reflect our position," he said. "I never wanted 1,000 guests witnessing my private vows. And now 1,000 guests have witnessed something much more private," Celine observed quietly. "My complete failure as a man. Yes, that's considerably more intimate than I'd planned to get with distant cousins and business associates." The bitterness in his voice surprised him. Celine considered him for a moment. Her head tilted slightly. "Is that what you think happened? That you failed as a man because someone else couldn't commit to you?" The question pierced through Kieran's self-pity with surgical precision. "What would you call it?" "I'd call it someone else's choice. One you couldn't control." She turned back toward the lake, giving him space to process her words. "Every day in the trauma ward, I see people whose lives changed in an instant. Car accidents, violence, sudden illness. The ones who survive aren't those who avoid pain, but those who learn to carry it differently." The simplicity of her perspective shifted something in Kieran's understanding of his situation, not removing his pain, but reframing it, not as his failure, but as an event he'd endured. He studied her profile, wondering what experiences had shaped her wisdom. "Do you always dispense life philosophy with your medical care?" he asked, resuming their walk. "Only on Sundays," she replied with a small smile. "The rest of the week, I just stitch people up and send them on their way." Their meetings became a ritual. Sunday mornings in the park, Wednesday evenings at an obscure bookstore cafe where the owner knew Selena and reserved their corner table without comment. In these spaces, Kieran rediscovered parts of himself buried beneath his public persona and his relationship with Rebecca. He learned that Selena lived in a small apartment filled with medical texts and carefully tended plants, that she stress-baked at midnight after difficult shifts, that she could recite Pablo Neruda poems in both Spanish and English. She shared stories of her patients, never breaking confidentiality, but conveying the courage she witnessed daily in children facing unimaginable challenges. In turn, Kieran revealed his passion for architecture beyond the corporate high-rises that had made his firm famous, his secret designs for sustainable community spaces, his love of Gaudi and Wright, his childhood dream of creating buildings that changed how people experience the world around them. "Why haven't you pursued those designs professionally?" Celine asked during one of their conversations, her fingers idly tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "My father believes Matthew's Architectural should focus on profitable ventures, office towers, luxury condominiums, not experimental community centers. And what do you believe?" The question lingered between them, challenging and supportive simultaneously. It followed Kieran back to his office when he finally returned to work after a month's absence. His employees' carefully neutral expressions couldn't entirely hide their curiosity, but Kieran found their scrutiny less invasive after his conversations with Celine. He brought pastries Celine had baked, cinnamon rolls with cardamom that filled the office with their spicy warmth. His executive assistant, Helen, who had fielded the barrage of calls and cancelled appointments during his absence, accepted one with surprise. "These are extraordinary," she said after her first bite. "A friend made them," Kieran replied. "The word friend, feeling simultaneously inadequate and monumental. That evening, alone in his penthouse that no longer felt quite so empty, Kieran called Celine. He listened to her describe a successful surgery, the sound of her voice bringing colour into spaces that had been grey for too long. "Have dinner with me," he said suddenly. "Not at a restaurant. Here, I'll cook." A brief silence followed, long enough for Kieran to wonder if he'd overstepped. "Not a date," he clarified quickly. "Just, I'd like to cook for you for once." "You cook?" The surprise in her voice made him smile. "Another hidden talent. Along with my ability to recite all major architectural movements in chronological order. Now that I have to hear." Her laughter eased the moment's tension. "Text me your address. I'll bring wine." As he ended the call, Kieran recognized the significance beneath the simple invitation, a threshold being crossed from refuge to something deliberately chosen. For the first time since Rebecca had walked away from him at the altar, he felt a stirring of anticipation for the future, tentative but real. Not because Celine had rescued him, but because she had shown him he was worth rescuing. And perhaps, more importantly, that he could rescue himself. Chapter 4. Deepening Currents. Kieran's penthouse occupied the top floor of a sleek glass tower he'd designed early in his career. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed panoramic views of the city, while the interior balanced minimalist elegance with unexpected warmth. Handcrafted furniture, textured fabrics, art carefully selected from local creators rather than big names. It was a space that revealed more about Kieran Matthews than any interview ever had. Celine arrived precisely at 7, a bottle of wine in one hand and a small potted herb in the other. Standing in his doorway, she appeared different from their casual meetings, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, a simple blue dress replacing her usual practical attire. The transformation wasn't dramatic, just a subtle shift that reminded Kieran she existed outside their carefully constructed neutral spaces. "For your kitchen," she said, handing him the plant. "Thai basil. Nearly impossible to kill, which makes it perfect for someone who spends as many hours at work as you probably do." The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught Kieran off guard. "How did you know I have houseplants?" "You mentioned caring for them helps you think. Besides, your balcony garden is featured in Architectural Digest." Her smile turned slightly sheepish. "Okay, so maybe I Googled you a little? Taking advantage of my digital footprint while maintaining your mystique?" Kieran led her into the open-concept kitchen where preparations for their meal were already underway. "That's hardly fair, Dr. Crawford. If it helps, there's embarrassingly little about me online. One publication from a medical journal and a 5-year-old photo from a hospital fundraiser." Celine moved naturally into the kitchen space, examining the ingredients arranged on the marble countertop. "Impressive. I half expected you to be heating up something pre-made while pretending to have cooked it." Wounded, Kieran placed a hand over his heart in mock offense while uncorking the wine. "My mother believed every man should know how to prepare at least 5 excellent meals. She taught me before she died." The casual mention of his mother shifted the atmosphere subtly. It was the first time Kieran had referenced her absence, a piece of personal history not included in his public profile. Celine accepted the glass of wine he offered, her eyes acknowledging the significance without pressing for details. "What's on the menu?" she asked instead. "Risotto with wild mushrooms, seared scallops, and asparagus." Kieran moved confidently around the kitchen, his designer suit replaced by dark jeans and a simple button-down with rolled sleeves. "I hope you're not vegetarian or allergic to seafood. I probably should have asked." No allergies, and I eat practically anything after hospital shifts. Some days, lunch is whatever I can grab from the vending machine between surgeries. They fell into an easy rhythm as Kieran cooked and Celine assisted, their conversation flowing naturally between subjects. The initial awkwardness of being in his personal space dissolved as the apartment filled with the aromas of garlic, wine, and simmering stock. "You rarely entertain here, do you?" Celine observed, noting the pristine condition of rarely used serving pieces. What gave it away? Everything's too perfect. Lived-in spaces have imperfections, a scratch on the counter, a slightly worn spot on the sofa. Kieran nodded, acknowledging her perception. "I prefer to keep my private space separate from my public life. Business entertaining happens at restaurants, family obligations at my father's estate." "And former fiancés?" The question slipped out before Celine could reconsider its propriety. Kieran's hands stilled momentarily over the risotto he was stirring. Rebecca preferred her own apartment downtown. She found this place too architectural. Her word, not mine. "That's like saying a book is too literary," Celine replied, drawing a smile from Kieran. She meant it lacked the traditional elements she'd grown up with. Crystal chandeliers, antique furniture, family portraits lining the hallways. He resumed stirring, his rhythm unbroken. "I designed this space to reflect light and shadow throughout the day." Rebecca never stayed long enough to notice how the sunset transforms the living room, or how moonlight creates patterns across the bedroom floor. The observation contained no bitterness, only the clarity of retrospective understanding. Celine recognized it as the kind of insight that comes only after emotional distance has been achieved. "You're the first person I've wanted to bring into this part of my world," Kieran admitted, not looking up from his cooking. The confession hung between them, significant in its simplicity. Over dinner at the glass table positioned to capture the cityscape below, their conversation shifted from safe topics to deeper waters. The excellent food and wine created an atmosphere of intimacy that encouraged disclosure. "My mother died when I was 12, Celine said, responding to Kieran's earlier revelation about his own mother. "Pancreatic cancer. My father raised me, himself, an English professor who suddenly had to learn how to deal with everything, from my first period to college applications. He did well, clearly. He taught me strength through gentleness. He never remarried, just devoted himself to making sure I had everything I needed." Celine twirled her wineglass between her fingers. "His favorite saying was, 'Beauty is how we survive.' He meant finding moments of grace, even in pain." "Is that why you became a doctor? To find grace in pain?" "Partly. And partly because I couldn't save my mother, so I decided to save everyone else I could." She offered the admission without self-pity. "What about you? Why architecture?" "My father is a third-generation real estate developer with a clear vision of the Matthews legacy. Architecture was the compromise. I could create, but within parameters. He considered practical." Kieran's expression revealed the complexity of his relationship with his father. Being his only son comes with expectations. The wedding was just one of them. And now? Now he's furious that my personal crisis, as he calls it, has jeopardized several pending contracts with Rebecca's family connections. Kieran's smile held no humor. The Matthews name must remain synonymous with success, regardless of personal cost. After dinner, they moved to the balcony where a small garden of native plants created a private sanctuary high above the city. The night air carried the scent of jasmine from potted vines trained along the railings. Below them, the city pulsed with light and movement, while above, stars emerged in the darkening sky. "It's another world up here," Celine observed, leaning against the railing, suspended between earth and sky. That was the intention, Kieran moved to stand beside her, close enough that their arms nearly touched. A transition space where elements meet. The moment for a first kiss presented itself naturally. The privacy, the beauty surrounding them, the connection deepening between them. Instead, Celine turned toward him and took his hand, intertwining their fingers deliberately. "We're both still healing," she said softly. "I don't want to be your bandage, Kieran." The honesty between them created an intimacy more profound than physical connection. He lifted their joined hands, studying the contrast between his broader fingers and her surgeon's hands with their capability and precision. "What do you want to be?" he asked, his voice low. "Right now, just this. Someone who sees you." Her answer contained no artifice, no agenda beyond the present moment. When she left an hour later, Kieran walked her to the elevator. The evening had shifted something between them, moving them from the safety of neutral ground to a more vulnerable territory where real connection and real risk existed. At the last moment, Celine turned back to him, her expression serious. "Thank you for dinner, and for trusting me with your space." Kieran took her hand, turning it palm up. His lips pressed against the center of her palm, not a gesture of passion, but something more deliberate and meaningful. His lips lingered there, warm against her skin, sending a current of awareness through them both that left Celine breathless long after she'd returned to her apartment. "Thank you for seeing me," he said simply. The elevator doors closed between them, but the connection remained, a living thing now, with possibilities neither had anticipated when they'd first met in a rain-soaked alley 6 weeks before. Chapter 5. Storm Clouds. The photograph appeared in the society section of the Sunday paper exactly 2 months after Kieran's aborted wedding. The image itself was innocuous, Kieran holding the door of an upscale Italian restaurant as Celine exited, their expressions animated in conversation. What made it noteworthy was the headline, "Matthew's heir finds comfort with mystery woman." Kieran discovered it when his executive assistant, Helen, placed the newspaper on his desk alongside his morning coffee, her expression carefully neutral. "Page 6, was all she said before withdrawing to her desk outside his office. The article speculated cruelly about Kieran's rapid rebound and questioned Celine's motives, describing her as an unknown doctor from Mercy General who appears to have captured the recently jilted billionaire's attention. Some anonymous source claimed to have information that Celine had strategically positioned herself to meet Kieran after his wedding disaster, a complete fabrication that nonetheless read plausibly to those who thrived on scandal. Anger, hot and immediate, surged through Kieran. He'd been careful, limiting their meetings to places away from curious eyes. Somehow, they'd been tracked regardless. He reached for his phone to warn Celine before she encountered the article, but a text from her arrived first. "My patience. Parents are asking if I'm dating that poor man from the news. We need to talk." The hospital administration had expressed concern about Celine's public profile potentially affecting the institution's reputation. Though no direct threat to her position was made, the implication was clear. Drama was unwelcome in a department dealing with critically ill children. She relayed this to Kieran that evening in his penthouse, her voice steady despite the tension evident in her shoulders. "I built my reputation on being unflappable in crisis," she explained, pacing the length of his living room. "Parents trust me with their children's lives because I project complete competence and control. Now I'm being viewed through this tabloid lens, the mysterious woman who caught the rich man on the rebound." "I'm sorry," Kieran said, the inadequacy of the words frustrating him. My name comes with this baggage. I should have been more careful. It's not your fault. Neither of us did anything wrong. Celine stopped pacing, turning to face him directly. But the reality is, your world operates differently from mine. In your sphere, this kind of attention might be uncomfortable but expected. In mine, it potentially undermines years of professional credibility. Before Kieran could respond, his phone chimed with a notification. He glanced at it automatically, then stiffened. Rebecca's name appeared on his screen for the first time since she'd left him at the altar. "What is it?" Celine asked, noting his reaction. Rebecca. The name felt strange on his tongue after weeks of deliberately not speaking it. "She's texting me congratulations on moving on so quickly." Celine's expression remained neutral, but Kieran didn't miss the slight tightening around her eyes. He opened the message, reading it quickly. Rebecca's words dripped with false sincerity and veiled insinuations about Celine's intentions. She mentioned her own growing regrets about leaving him, suggesting that perhaps she had acted too hastily, words designed to reopen wounds just beginning to heal. "She's married now," Kieran said, setting his phone face down on the coffee table. "The article mentioned it. She eloped to Bali with someone from her graduate program. Apparently they'd been secretly involved for months before our wedding." The information landed between them like a physical object, reshaping the emotional landscape they navigated. Celine sat on the edge of the sofa, her professional composure momentarily slipping to reveal genuine concern. "How do you feel about that?" she asked, the question direct without being invasive. Kieran considered his response carefully, wanting to give her his honest assessment rather than the answer that might ease the moment. "Less than I would have expected 2 months ago. It confirms what I already suspected, that her feelings for me had died long before she left me at the altar." "And your feelings for her?" "Complicated. Not love. Not anymore." He joined her on the sofa, maintaining a deliberate space between them. "There's anger, certainly, humiliation, but mostly relief that I didn't marry someone who didn't love me, who was in love with someone else." Celine nodded, accepting his answer without pressing further. "The article changes things between us," she said after a moment of silence. "We need to be clear about what we're doing here." The statement wasn't a rejection, but a doctor's precision applied to an emotional situation, identifying the condition before determining treatment. Kieran respected her directness, even as he felt anxiety rising at the potential loss of their connection. "What are we doing here, Celine?" He turned the question back to her. "You've been careful to keep this friendship platonic. Is that still what you want?" "I don't know." Her honesty was refreshing amid the manipulation and speculation surrounding them. "I care about you, Kieran, more than I expected to. But I've built my life around my career, my independence. I can't become a footnote in someone else's narrative, the woman who consoled the abandoned groom." The description stung, though Kieran recognized its accuracy from an outsider's perspective. The society pages would never see the depth of their connection, the genuine understanding that had developed between them. To the public, their relationship would always be defined by its beginning, by his humiliation and her compassion. "I want to fix this for you," he said finally. "I have contacts at the paper. I could have a retraction published, pressure them, to leave you out of future coverage. And then what? We only meet in secret. I become your hidden companion while you navigate your public life?" Celine shook her head. "That's not a solution, Kieran. That's a bandage on a deeper issue." The conversation was interrupted by a call from the hospital, an emergency involving one of Celine's patients, requiring immediate surgery. The medical crisis pulled her back into her professional world, providing a temporary reprieve from the personal one they were navigating. "I need to go," she said, already reaching for her bag. "We'll continue this later." Let me know how your patient does. Kieran walked her to the door, concern for her immediate situation, overshadowing their unresolved discussion. I will. She paused at the threshold, turning back to meet his eyes. Directly. Don't contact the newspaper. Promise me. I handle my own problems. The request revealed something essential about Celine, her fierce independence, her need to maintain control over her own narrative. Kieran recognized it as both her strength and her potential limitation. I promise. 2 days later, a courier delivered an expensive leather medical bag to Celine's department at the hospital. The card attached bore Kieran's distinctive handwriting. Tools for healing deserve proper housing, no strings attached. The gift, thoughtful, professional, aligned with her identity as a doctor, was meant as a gesture of support and understanding. Instead, it became the catalyst for their first real argument when Celine called him that evening, her voice tightly controlled. You sent a $5,000 medical bag to my workplace, she stated without preamble. Yes. Kieran had been reviewing contracts in his home office, not immediately grasping the issue. It's practical, high quality. I thought you'd appreciate it. What I'd appreciate is not having my colleagues speculate about my relationship with a patient's wealthy relative, Celine replied, tension evident in every word. The gossip was just beginning to die down, and now this arrives with a courier and a handwritten note, reigniting everyone's curiosity. Understanding dawned belatedly. I didn't think that's the problem, isn't it? Celine interrupted. You didn't think about how it would appear in my world. In your reality, expensive gifts are normal. In mine, they raise questions about my integrity, my motivations. The criticism landed with particular force because it echoed Kieran's own insecurities about their different backgrounds. I was trying to support you, not complicate your life. I can't be part of your redemption story, Celine said, her voice softening slightly but remaining firm. I need to know if what's between us is real or if I'm just the opposite of what hurt you. The compassionate doctor instead of the cold socialite, the self-sufficient professional instead of the family-approved match. The question cut to the heart of Kieran's confusion about his own feelings. Was he drawn to Celine for herself or for what she represented? A different path, a rejection of his previous life. He genuinely didn't know. I need some space, Celine continued when he didn't immediately respond, to figure out if this is something worth pursuing despite the complications. How much space? Kieran asked, trying to keep the desperation from his voice. I don't know that either. Her honesty, even in this painful moment, remained her greatest strength. I just know I can't be what you need right now, while also being what my patients need, what I need for myself. After they disconnected, Kieran stood at his balcony overlooking the city, the night sky obscured by gathering storm clouds that matched his internal landscape. 3 floors below, he spotted a photographer with a telephoto lens trained on his building. Another reminder that privacy was a luxury his position rarely afforded. Inside, his phone chimed with a message from his father. Dinner tomorrow, non-negotiable. We must discuss damage control regarding your recent PR situation. The external pressures mounted as his personal connection to Celine, the one genuine relationship in his life, threatened to slip away. For the first time since she'd found him in that alley, Kieran felt truly alone with his pain, unsure how to bridge the gap between their worlds without compromising either. Chapter 6. Separate Reflections. For 3 weeks, they didn't speak. No texts, no calls, no accidental meetings in neutral territory. The silence stretched between them with physical presence, a void Kieran filled with work and Celine with her medical responsibilities, yet neither could entirely escape the awareness of the other's absence. Kieran threw himself into the international design competition for a new children's hospital wing at Mercy General, Celine's hospital. The project had been announced months earlier, before their paths had crossed, but now it carried personal significance beyond professional ambition. Working through nights, fueled by coffee and the need to channel his emotions into something constructive, he created spaces that reflected everything he'd learned from Selena about healing environments. His design incorporated natural light, streaming through strategically placed windows, gardens where patients could feel connected to the outside world even during long-term treatment, private alcoves where families could find moments of peace between crises. The staff areas included quiet rooms for doctors to decompress after difficult cases, spaces Kieran knew Celine would appreciate from her descriptions of catching brief naps in supply closets during 36-hour shifts. "This is different from your usual work," Helen observed when he shared the preliminary designs with his executive team. "More human." The comment might have offended him once, suggesting his previous designs lacked humanity. Now he recognized the truth in it. Buildings should serve people, not the other way around. The philosophy felt right in a way his father's emphasis on prestigious addresses and imposing facades never had. In the solitude of his drafting room, Kieran realized how profoundly Celine's perspective had influenced him. Her approach to life had seeped into his creative process, teaching him to see architecture as holding space for human experience, as he'd once described it to her. His dinner with William Matthews had been predictably tense, his father oscillating between anger over the continued public relations, nightmare and calculation about how to leverage Kieran's relationship with a respected pediatric surgeon for positive press. When Kieran refused to discuss Celine, explaining they were taking time apart, his father's disappointment had been palpable. "You can't even maintain the rebound relationship," William had asked, swirling expensive scotch in his crystal tumbler. "Perhaps Rebecca was right to have doubts about your stability." The barb, designed to wound, had instead crystallized something for Kieran. His father would never see him clearly, would always view his life through the lens of social advantage and family position. For the first time, Kieran didn't feel diminished by the criticism. He simply recognized it as a reflection of his father's limitations, not his own. Across the city, Celine immersed herself in a difficult case involving conjoined twins. The 4-month-old girls shared a portion of their heart wall, requiring a complex series of surgeries to separate them while ensuring both could survive independently. The parents, exhausted, terrified, clinging to hope with desperate determination, reminded Celine why she'd chosen such a demanding specialty. "We're constructing a new architectural reality for their bodies," she explained to the surgical team during planning sessions, "creating separate spaces that preserve essential function while allowing independent growth." The metaphor came from Kieran, though she didn't reference him directly. His descriptions of architecture as fundamentally about creating protective, functional spaces for human life had resonated with her understanding of surgery. Both disciplines required technical precision in service of human needs. The twins' case consumed her professional attention, but in quiet moments, Celine found herself missing Kieran with an intensity that surprised her. Not just his company, but his particular way of seeing the world, finding beauty in structural elements others overlooked, appreciating negative space as essential rather than empty. During one particularly grueling planning session when conflicting opinions threatened to derail the surgical approach, she heard his voice in her memory: "Trust your foundation." The advice steadied her, allowing her to refocus the team on core principles rather than getting lost in secondary concerns. The twins survived the first phase of their separation, a testament to medical science and the human drive to overcome seemingly impossible challenges. As she left the hospital after 48 continuous hours of work, Celine found herself reaching for her phone, wanting to share the success with Kieran. She stopped herself, uncertain whether breaking their silence would help or hinder the clarity they both sought. Instead, she drove home through pre-dawn streets, the city quiet except for delivery trucks and early commuters. In her apartment, surrounded by the practical simplicity she preferred, Celine realized her space felt different somehow, not physically altered but emotionally recalibrated. After knowing Kieran, after seeing how his environment reflected his inner world, she noticed the deliberate absence of personal history in her own home. No family photos, minimal mementos, walls painted therapeutic neutrals rather than colors that might evoke emotional responses. Had she created a hospital room for herself rather than a true home? The question lingered as she finally slept, exhaustion claiming her before she could fully examine its implications. On the night Kieran completed his hospital design submission, a thunderstorm knocked out power across the city. In the darkness of his penthouse, surrounded by flickering candles illuminating the intricate model he'd constructed, he realized the design was complete. Not because he'd addressed every technical detail, but because it felt right, balanced, truly integrative of function and human experience. Lightning flashed, momentarily flooding the room with brilliant light. In that instant of illumination, Kieran understood something essential. His work had always been good, but now it contained something of his authentic self, informed by genuine human connection rather than theoretical principles. Whether or not he won the competition, this design represented a personal breakthrough. Without allowing himself to overthink, he reached for his phone and called Celine. She answered on the third ring, her voice cautious but not unwelcoming. "Kieran, I just needed to hear your voice," he admitted, the darkness and storm creating an intimacy that transcended their physical separation. The line between them filled with unspoken words, the accumulated thoughts of 3 weeks apart. Pressing against the silence, finally, Celine exhaled audibly. "I miss you in ways I didn't expect to miss anyone again," she said, the simple truth cutting through pretense and self-protection. Outside, thunder rumbled, vibrating through Kieran's body. "The hospital competition. I've submitted my design. It's different from anything I've done before. Better, I think." "Because of what happened with Rebecca?" Celine asked, the question testing whether his creative evolution stemmed from trauma or growth. "Because of you," Kieran replied honestly, "because you taught me to see spaces through the eyes of those who need healing." The admission hung between them, neither an accusation nor a burden, simply an acknowledgement of impact. Their connection had changed them both in ways neither had anticipated when she'd knelt beside him in that rain-soaked alley. "I'd like to see it sometime," Celine said after a moment, her tone warming slightly. "Your design. I'd like that, too." Kieran moved to his balcony doors, watching lightning illuminate the cityscape in dramatic flashes. "How are your patients? The twins?" The professional question opened a pathway back to connection, allowing Celine to share her work without immediately navigating the personal complications between them. As she described the surgical challenges and breakthroughs, her voice gained animation, revealing her passion for healing. Kieran listened, asking thoughtful questions, genuinely interested in this core aspect of her identity. When the power returned hours later, they were still talking, their conversation having moved gradually from professional subjects to more personal reflections. They made no definitive plans, set no expectations, simply re-established the connection that had been temporarily suspended. "We should talk in person," Kieran said as they prepared to end the call. "When you're ready." "I think I am," Celine replied, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. Not for answers or commitments, just to see where we are now. "No expensive gifts," Kieran promised, drawing a soft laugh from Celine. "And no expectations beyond honest conversation," she added. After they disconnected, Kieran remained at his balcony, watching the storm move eastward, leaving cleared air in its wake. Stars appeared in patches between dissipating clouds, their ancient light reaching him across impossible distances. Something about their persistence felt significant, like his connection with Celine, not extinguished by time or space, merely waiting for conditions to allow their light to reach each other again. Chapter 7. Deepening Intimacy. The news arrived on a brilliant spring morning. Kieran's design had won the international competition for Mercy General's new pediatric wing. The announcement, made at a gala fundraiser for the hospital foundation, created a buzz that rippled through both the architectural community and medical circles. For Kieran, however, one reaction mattered more than all others. Celine attended the gala as a department representative, her professional role requiring her presence regardless of personal complications. Dressed in a simple midnight blue gown that transformed her from harried surgeon to elegant woman, she moved through the crowd with practiced poise, discussing medical needs with potential donors while avoiding the social politics that dominated such events. When Kieran's name was announced as the competition winner, her eyes found him automatically across the crowded ballroom. He stood on the stage, impeccable in his tuxedo, accepting the honor with a grace that belied the personal turbulence of recent months. As he described his vision for healing spaces that served patients, families, and medical staff with equal consideration, Celine recognized her own influence in his words, not because he credited her, but because his understanding now incorporated perspectives she'd shared during their conversations. Their gazes connected briefly as he concluded. His remarks, the moment, though fleeting, conveyed mutual recognition that transcended their separation. When Kieran stepped down from the stage, he was immediately surrounded by congratulatory colleagues and hospital board members eager to discuss implementation details. Celine remained at a distance, allowing him his professional triumph without complication. Later, as the evening wound toward conclusion, they finally stood face to face near the terrace doors, the first time they'd been in physical proximity since their argument weeks before. "Congratulations," Celine said simply. "Your design is extraordinary." "Thank you." Kieran's eyes searched hers, looking beyond professional courtesy for her genuine reaction. "I meant what I said in my speech. Understanding healing from multiple perspectives transformed the concept." Before they could continue their conversation, William Matthews approached, his commanding presence drawing attention from nearby guests. Impeccably dressed and imposingly tall, he emanated the authority of a man accustomed to deference. His assessment of Celine was barely disguised beneath social pleasantries. "Dr. Crawford, I presume." His handshake was firm, evaluative. "I've heard a great deal about your work with pediatric patients, Mr. Matthews." Celine met his gaze directly, neither intimidated nor overly impressed by his position. "Your son's design will make a significant difference for the children in our care." Yes, Kieran has always had talent, when properly directed. The comment, ostensibly complimentary, carried an undercurrent of control that didn't escape either listener. Kieran's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "She's why this design works," he told his father, his voice level but resolute. "She taught me to see spaces through the eyes of those who need healing." The public acknowledgement of her influence, something Kieran had carefully avoided in His official remarks to prevent fueling gossip revealed his priorities more clearly than any private declaration could have. William's expression flickered with surprise before resuming its practiced neutrality. "Then the hospital is fortunate to have both your contributions," he replied diplomatically, though his evaluating gaze suggested the conversation wasn't concluded. In his mind, "If you'll excuse me, the board chairman is signaling for my attention." When William departed, the tension he'd brought with him dissipated gradually. Celine regarded Kieran with newfound appreciation for the subtle battle he'd just engaged in on her behalf, and more significantly, on behalf of his own autonomy. "Would you like to see the model?" Kieran asked, offering a professional reason to continue their interaction away from curious eyes. The full-scale version is displayed in the adjacent gallery. The exhibit space had been transformed to showcase Kieran's winning design, with architectural models, digital renderings, and material samples arranged for donors to appreciate the vision they were funding. As other guests began departing, Kieran and Celine found themselves relatively alone among the displays. "You incorporated gardens on every floor," Celine observed, studying the detailed model that revealed interior spaces invisible from exterior perspectives. "Bringing nature directly into healing environments reduces recovery time and improves outcomes," Kieran explained, standing close enough that she could detect his familiar scent, sandalwood, and something uniquely him. "The staff areas include proper sleeping quarters, not just on-call rooms with uncomfortable couches." Celine smiled, recognizing how much attention he'd paid to her offhanded complaints about hospital infrastructure. "You remembered everything I mentioned. Not just what you said, what you needed." His voice lowered, the conversation shifting from professional to personal territory. "I've missed you, Celine." The simple statement, unadorned with justifications or pressure, resonated with her own experience during their separation. Before she could respond, Kieran's phone chimed with messages from his team regarding post-announcement media opportunities. Reality intruded, reminding them both of the public context surrounding their private connection. "I should go," Celine said, practical considerations reasserting themselves. "Early surgery tomorrow." "May I call you?" Kieran asked, maintaining the respectful distance they'd established. "Yes." Her answer came without hesitation. "I'd like that." The weeks that followed established a new pattern in their relationship. As Kieran began consulting regularly with the hospital on implementing his design, their professional collaboration provided structure for rebuilding their personal connection. They met in conference rooms to discuss technical requirements, shared coffee in the hospital cafeteria between Celine's surgeries, gradually re-establishing trust without explicitly addressing the unresolved questions between them. When Celine's father visited the city for his 6-month cardiac checkup, Kieran joined them for dinner at Celine's invitation. James Crawford, a slender man with his daughter's perceptive eyes and gentle demeanor, observed their interaction with understated interest. "So you're the architect," he said, when Celine stepped away to take an urgent call from the hospital. "Celine mentioned you're designing the new children's wing." "I am." Kieran felt unexpectedly nervous, recognizing the importance of this man's opinion to Celine. "Your daughter's insights were invaluable to the concept." "Celine has always seen what others miss," James commented, stirring his tea thoughtfully. "Even as a child, she noticed details adults overlooked. How light fell through leaves, how certain sounds affected different people. Her mother was the same way." The mention of Celine's mother, a subject Kieran knew remained tender despite the years since her passing, indicated a level of acceptance he hadn't anticipated. "She speaks very highly of you," Kieran offered, hoping to reciprocate the openness James had shown, "as she does of you." James studied him with gentle assessment. "Not just your professional work, though that clearly impresses her. She mentioned how you listen, really listen, when she speaks. Before Kieran could respond, Celine returned, apologizing for the interruption. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but something had changed in the dynamic between the three of them, an unspoken acknowledgement that connections were forming beyond casual friendship. Later that evening, after seeing James settled in his hotel, Kieran and Celine walked through the mild spring night, their pace unhurried, shoulders occasionally brushing. When they reached Celine's apartment building, the moment for parting arrived with palpable tension. "Would you like to come up?" Celine asked, the invitation deliberately ambiguous, allowing Kieran to interpret it as either extending their conversation or something more significant. Her apartment, though familiar to Kieran through her descriptions, revealed new dimensions. Of Celine in person, medical journals stacked beside poetry collections, a piano in the corner with sheet music open to Debussy, plants thriving on every available surface. The space reflected her essence, practical, intellectual, nurturing, with unexpected artistic elements that many people would never see. "I play when I can't sleep," she explained, noticing his attention on the piano. "Not well, but it helps. Clear my mind after difficult days." "Would you play something?" Kieran asked, genuinely curious about this previously unmentioned aspect of her. Celine hesitated, then sat at the instrument, her fingers finding the keys with practiced familiarity. The piece she played was melancholy, but not despairing, complex without being showy, revealing vulnerability she rarely displayed in other contexts. Kieran watched her face as she played, struck by how completely she inhabited the music, temporarily, setting aside the controlled competence that defined her professional persona. When the final notes faded, silence expanded between them, filled with unspoken recognition. Kieran moved to sit beside her on the piano bench, close enough to share warmth without touching. Celine turned toward him, her expression open in a way he'd never seen before. "I've been thinking about what you said that night on the phone," she began, "about how I've influenced your work. It goes both ways, you know. Your perspective on creating spaces. It's changed how I approach surgery, how I think about the environments we heal in." "I'm glad," Kieran replied, understanding the admission represented significant trust from someone so self-contained. "That's what connection should do, help us see differently." Celine's hand moved to his face, her touch tentative yet deliberate as she traced the line of his jaw. "I've been afraid," she confessed. "Not of you, but of this, of wanting someone, enough that losing them would matter." The honesty of her words resonated with Kieran's own unacknowledged fears. Rebecca's rejection had wounded him, certainly, but its power had come partly from his awareness that he'd invested in the relationship primarily because it met expectations rather than from genuine attachment. With Celine, the risk felt immeasurably greater because his feelings were authentic, unmediated by social advantage or family approval. "I can't promise we won't hurt each other," he said, covering her hand with his own. "But I can promise to see you, all of you, not just the parts that fit some preconceived idea." The certainty in his voice created a bridge between them, connecting present vulnerability to future possibility. Celine leaned forward, eliminating the remaining distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, exploratory, a question being asked and tentatively answered. The second deepened, carrying the weight of weeks apart and the relief of reconnection. That night, their relationship crossed into physical intimacy for the first time. In the half-light of her bedroom, they discovered each other with reverent hands and whispered confessions. Their lovemaking carried the weight of their individual journeys and shared understanding, tender at first, then building to a passion that overwhelmed them both. The barriers between them dissolved completely, each touch healing something long broken within them. Afterward, as Selina slept in his arms, Kieran traced the curve of her shoulder with wondering fingers, studying her face in the moonlight. He marveled at how this woman who found him at his lowest point now witnessed his triumph without trying to claim credit for his recovery. How completely she had remade his understanding of love without demanding anything in return. The morning brought no regrets, only the quiet acknowledgement that they'd crossed a threshold together. Over coffee in Celine's kitchen, sunlight streaming through the eastern windows, they began the delicate process of defining what existed between them, not with labels or declarations, but with honest assessment of practical realities. "My schedule is unpredictable," Celine reminded him. "Surgeries run long, emergencies happen. Patients need me at inconvenient hours. And my work often requires travel. Social obligations I can't always avoid," Kieran added, refusing to pretend their different worlds wouldn't present challenges. Yet, beneath these pragmatic considerations lay a deeper understanding that what they'd found in each other was worth the effort of navigation, worth creating space within their established lives for something neither had been seeking when they'd first met. In the weeks that followed, they created a rhythm that honored both their demanding careers and growing connection. Kieran began consulting with Celine's hospital on the new wing's implementation, their professional collaboration deepening their personal bond. When Celine completed a particularly challenging surgery, Kieran was the first person she called. When Kieran won a prestigious industry award, Celine attended the ceremony as his acknowledged partner, facing the society photographers with quiet confidence. "He sees you," James Crawford told his daughter during a phone conversation after. "Returning home, not just the doctor, not just the woman, all of you." The observation, coming from the person who knew her best, confirmed what Celine had already recognized. With Kieran, she didn't need to compartmentalize herself, to present only the aspects deemed appropriate for specific contexts. For the first time since her mother's death had taught her the painful vulnerability of attachment, Celine found herself willingly opening doors she'd kept firmly closed, discovering that sharing herself completely didn't diminish her independence, but rather enriched it with new dimensions of experience. Chapter 8. Crucible. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in early summer. Celine, accustomed to middle-of-night hospital emergencies, answered immediately, fully alert despite having fallen asleep just 2 hours earlier after a complex surgery. But this wasn't the hospital. It was her Aunt Catherine, voice tight with controlled panic, explaining that James Crawford had collapsed while teaching his evening literature seminar. "Heart attack," Catherine said, medical terminology sounding foreign in her artistic cadence. "They've stabilized him, but the doctor mentioned something about the same condition that affected your mother initially. He's asking for you." The words ignited a primal fear in Celine. Her mother's cardiac condition had begun with similar symptoms before cascading into the pancreatic cancer that eventually took her life. The comparison, even as a precautionary note from doctors unfamiliar with her family history, sent ice through Celine's veins. Kieran, asleep beside her in his penthouse bedroom, woke instantly at her changed breathing. In the dim light from the bathroom, he saw the transformation happening, Dr. Crawford emerging, compartmentalizing emotions to focus on medical necessities. "My father," she explained, already moving to dress. "Heart attack. I need to get to Cedar Heights immediately." Cedar Heights, her hometown, 3 hours by car. Kieran rose, reaching for his phone. "I'll arrange the helicopter. We can be there in 45 minutes. The decisive action, bypassing discussion. Of whether he would accompany her, or if such dramatic transport was necessary, momentarily broke through Celine's professional detachment. She paused, one arm through her sweater sleeve, struck by the simple assumption of partnership in crisis. "The hospital is expecting you," Kieran continued, already connecting with his company's aviation service. "I've requested your father's records be prepared for your review upon arrival." In the controlled chaos of preparation, Celine observed Kieran with new awareness. The man who moved efficiently around the bedroom, arranging transportation and packing essentials, was neither the broken figure from the alley nor the polished architect from society functions. This was Kieran in crisis, focused, resourceful, using privilege as a tool rather than a badge. The helicopter flight through pre-dawn darkness occurred in relative silence, Celine reviewing her father's initial medical reports on her tablet, Kieran making necessary arrangements to clear their professional obligations for the coming days. When they landed at Cedar Heights Memorial Hospital, Dr. Eliza Yang, the cardiac specialist, met them on the helipad. "Unusual arrival method, Dr. Crawford," she noted dryly, leading them through service corridors to avoid disrupting regular hospital operations. "Unusual circumstances," Celine replied, her tone professional despite her personal connection to the patient. "Thank you for sending the preliminary EKG and blood work. Has the echo been completed?" The medical conversation continued as they approached James's room, Celine's questions precise and technical. Kieran maintained a respectful distance, understanding her need to approach her father's condition first as a doctor before allowing herself to react as a daughter. James lay connected to monitoring equipment, his normally vibrant presence diminished by hospital surroundings, but his eyes still alert. When Celine entered, his expression lightened immediately. "All this fuss for an old man's indigestion," he said, attempting humor despite obvious discomfort. "Acute myocardial infarction isn't indigestion, Dad." Celine moved to his bedside, her professional mask slipping as she took his hand. "And you're not old. Old enough to know arrhythmia when I feel it." James's gaze shifted to Kieran, who had remained near the doorway. "You brought company." "Mr. Crawford." Kieran stepped forward, his demeanor respectful without being obsequious. "I'm sorry we're meeting again under these circumstances." James studied him with the perceptiveness that had made him a beloved literature professor for 4 decades. No one flies across the state at dawn for a casual acquaintance. "Thank you for bringing my daughter safely." The acknowledgement of Kieran's presence, of his place in Celine's life, of his role in this family crisis, carried significance beyond the simple words. Celine felt something shift between the three of them, a recognition of connections forming that transcended conventional definitions. The next 72 hours unfolded in the compressed time of medical crisis: tests, consultations, treatment decisions. Celine divided herself between professional consultation with the cardiac team and emotional support for her father. Kieran established himself as a steady presence, managing practical details that allowed Celine to focus on medical concerns, arranging comfortable accommodations near the hospital, ensuring meals appeared when needed, creating a temporary office in a hospital conference room where he could continue essential work remotely. When preliminary test results suggested James would require bypass surgery, followed by extensive rehabilitation, the immediate crisis evolved into longer-term planning. Sitting in the hospital cafeteria during a rare quiet moment, Celine faced the realities of her father's recovery needs. "He can't stay alone in that house during rehabilitation," she said, medical training and daughterly concern merging in her assessment. "The stairs alone would be impossible initially. There's no bathroom on the main floor." "There are good residential rehabilitation facilities," Kieran offered cautiously, aware of the intensely personal nature of these decisions. He'd hate That, Celine's exhaustion showed in the slight tremor of her hand as she lifted her coffee cup. He needs his books, his music, his garden. Those things are medicine for him. Kieran considered her words carefully, recognizing the echo of her earlier statements about healing environments. What if we modified the house, made it accessible during his recovery? The suggestion hung between them, its implications extending beyond practical solutions to deeper questions about their relationship and respective roles. Celine studied Kieran's face, looking for signs of overstepping or presumption, finding instead genuine desire to contribute meaningfully. "We could convert the dining room to a temporary bedroom," she said tentatively, testing this collaborative approach to her family's needs. "But the bathroom would still require significant modifications." "I know people who specialize in accessibility renovations," Kieran replied, pulling out his tablet to sketch preliminary ideas. "We could have it completed before he's discharged from hospital." They bent over the screen together, Kieran's architectural expertise merging with Celine's understanding of her father's specific needs. In this focused collaboration, their professional strengths aligned in service of something deeply personal, creating a healing space for someone they both cared about. When James's surgery was successfully completed and his condition stabilized, Celine finally allowed herself to acknowledge the emotional toll of the crisis. Returning to their hotel room after 36 consecutive hours at the hospital, she practically collapsed, the professional composure that had sustained her giving way to relief and exhaustion. Kieran guided her gently to the bed, removing her shoes, bringing water without being asked. His quiet efficiency expressed more than words could have, his understanding of what she needed, his willingness to provide it without expectation of recognition. "Thank you," Celine said simply, too tired for eloquence. "For everything." "No, thanks needed." Kieran sat beside her, his hand covering hers. "This is what we do for each other." The simplicity of his statement encompassed everything that had developed between them. Not grand declarations of eternal devotion, but practical care, showing up when needed, supporting without controlling. It stood in stark contrast to the relationship Celine had previously experienced, where independence and attachment had seemed mutually exclusive rather than complementary. As James's immediate health crisis stabilized, longer-term considerations moved to the forefront. The cardiac team recommended a specialized treatment protocol available at the University Medical Center near Mercy General, essentially relocating James to Celine's city for several months of rehabilitation and monitoring. "I can coordinate with an excellent cardiac rehabilitation team," Celine explained to her father, reviewing options while carefully respecting his autonomy in treatment decisions. "You'd stay with me during the initial intensive phase, then transition back home once you're stabilized." James considered the proposal thoughtfully, his literary mind always seeking the subtext beneath surface communications. "And your work? Your life? Having your old father underfoot for months would significantly impact both." "My work is flexible," Celine replied, perhaps too quickly. "The hospital administration has already approved a modified schedule to accommodate family medical leave provisions." "And Kieran?" James asked directly, his gaze holding his daughter's. "Where does he fit in this arrangement?" The question forced Celine to confront the unaddressed aspects of her relationship, the careful compartmentalization she maintained between her professional life, her time with Kieran, and her family responsibilities. The crisis had temporarily aligned these usually separate spheres, but sustainable integration required more deliberate consideration. Before she could formulate a response, Kieran himself appeared in the doorway, carrying the architectural renderings. They developed for modifying James's home. Sensing the conversation's personal nature, he hesitated, but James waved him in. "Perfect timing," James said. "We were just discussing future living arrangements. I understand my daughter plans to transform herself into my personal physician and caretaker for the foreseeable future." Kieran glanced between father and daughter, reading the undercurrents with surprising accuracy. "Actually, I've been working on alternatives that might better serve everyone's needs." He unrolled the drawings on the adjustable hospital table, revealing detailed plans for comprehensive modifications to James's historic home. A residential elevator disguised within existing architectural features, an expanded ground floor, bathroom with accessibility features that maintained the home's aesthetic integrity, subtle ramps that wouldn't compromise the classic porch design. The work could be completed within 6 weeks, Kieran explained, pointing out specific features. In the interim, there are several options that would maintain your independence while ensuring proper medical supervision. The presentation, professional, thorough, respectful of both practical needs and emotional considerations, demonstrated Kieran's understanding of the Crawford family values. Not imposing his vision, but offering solutions that honored James's desire for autonomy and Celine's concern for her father's well-being. James studied the plans with genuine interest, his academic mind appreciating both the technical solutions and the thoughtfulness behind them. "Impressive work, but I imagine implementing this would require your direct involvement." "Yes," Kieran acknowledged. "I'd want to personally oversee the project to ensure it meets your specific needs." "Which would mean temporarily relocating your work to Cedar Heights," James observed. "A significant professional sacrifice for someone you've met exactly twice." The comment, though delivered without obvious judgment, named the elephant in the room. Kieran's willingness to rearrange his life around Celine's family crisis represented a level of commitment they hadn't explicitly discussed. Celine felt sudden alarm at the potential imbalance, the possibility that Kieran was subordinating his needs to hers in unhealthy ways. "Dad," she began carefully, "Kieran has his own firm to manage. We can hire local contractors to implement these plans without requiring his constant presence." "I can work remotely," Kieran countered, turning towards Celine. "The hospital project is in development phase, which can be managed from anywhere. My team is fully capable of handling day-to-day operations in my partial absence." "That's not the point," Celine replied, aware of her father observing their interaction with keen interest. "This is my family. Responsibility. You shouldn't have to rearrange your entire life around it." "I thought we were building something together," Kieran said quietly, the simple statement revealing the gap between their respective understandings of their relationship. Celine felt trapped between contradictory imperatives, her desire to maintain independence, her genuine feelings for Kieran, her responsibilities toward her father, her professional obligations. The tension crystallized in this moment of crisis, forcing examination of patterns she'd maintained without full awareness. "We can't build on a foundation where one of us is always sacrificing," she said finally, the words emerging from a place of fear rather than reflection. "I can't let you put your life on hold for my family." James, recognizing the conversation had moved beyond the immediate topic of home modifications, diplomatically requested privacy for his afternoon rest. When Celine and Kieran stepped into the hospital corridor, the unresolved tension accompanied them. "I should check in with the cardiac team," Celine said, "professional responsibilities, providing refuge from emotional complexity. We can continue this discussion later." "When?" Kieran asked, not aggressively but with genuine concern, "because it feels like we're making decisions about our future without actually discussing them directly." The observation held uncomfortable. Truth. Celine had been making unilateral determinations about managing her father's care, about the boundaries of Kieran's involvement, about the intersection of their professional and personal lives, all without explicitly addressing the underlying relationship questions. "I need time," she said finally, "to focus on Dad's immediate needs without complicating everything with relationship definitions and expectations." The request for space landed between them with the weight of potential separation. Kieran studied her face, searching for the real message beneath the stated one. "Is this about your father's health, or about your fear of letting me too close during a vulnerable time?" The question, insightful, challenging without being accusatory, revealed how well he'd come to understand her core patterns. Celine felt suddenly exposed, her carefully maintained compartments becoming transparent under his perceptive gaze. "Maybe both," she admitted, the honesty costing her considerable effort. "I don't know how to manage all these pieces simultaneously. I need to focus on being his daughter and his doctor right now, without also navigating what it means to be whatever we are to each other." Kieran nodded slowly, accepting her truth without dismissing it. "I'll return to the city tomorrow," he said finally. "The renovation plans are yours to use however you see fit. My team can coordinate with any contractors you select." "Thank you," Celine replied, aware that her relief at his acceptance mixed uncomfortably with regret at the distance she'd created. "For understanding." "I understand," Kieran agreed, his eyes holding hers steadily. "But understanding doesn't mean I agree that separation is the only solution. There are other ways to carry burdens, Celine." He left the following morning, returning to his architectural practice and the hospital project development, while Celine remained with her father. Their communication dwindled to practical updates and occasional phone calls that maintained connection, without addressing the fundamental questions suspended between them. As days stretched into weeks, with only brief, practical communications between them, both questioned whether love required too high a price, the vulnerability of needing someone who might not always be there when personal crisis altered carefully constructed lives. Chapter 9. Revelation. A month into their separation, with James's conditions stabilized and rehabilitation progressing steadily, Celine received an unexpected call from her father's neighbor. "There's someone at your dad's house," Mrs. Whitaker reported, her tone blending concern with curiosity. "A team of workers and a well-dressed man directing them. Your father gave them access, but I thought you should know." Puzzled and slightly alarmed, Celine drove immediately to her childhood home. The scene that greeted her defied immediate comprehension. A construction crew efficiently installing what appeared to be an exterior elevator shaft designed to blend seamlessly with the Victorian architecture. Landscapers modifying the garden pathways to eliminate steps while preserving the aesthetic integrity, and standing amidst this coordinated activity, conferring with the project foreman, was Kieran. He wore no suit today, instead dressed in casual, clothes appropriate for a construction site, his attention completely absorbed in reviewing technical specifications. He didn't notice Celine's arrival until she was nearly beside him, her footsteps silent on the newly laid permeable pathway designed for both wheelchair access and proper drainage. "Kieran." His name emerged somewhere between question and statement. "What is this?" He turned, unsurprised by her presence. Mrs. Whitaker's call had been anticipated, perhaps even arranged. "Accessibility modifications," he replied simply. "Your father approved the final plans last week." "Last week?" Celine repeated, processing the implications. "You've been in communication with my father without telling me?" "He contacted me," Kieran clarified, leading her away from the workers to a quiet corner of the garden where they could speak privately. "Said he'd been reviewing the plans and wanted to discuss implementation details." The revelation that her father and Kieran had established independent communication shifted Celine's understanding of the situation. She'd been operating under the assumption that her absence had created corresponding distance between Kieran and her family responsibilities. Instead, it appeared connections had continued developing without her mediation. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming here?" she asked, her tone more confused than accusatory. "Would it have made a difference?" Kieran's question contained no bitterness, only genuine inquiry. "You asked for space to focus on your father. I've respected that. This project doesn't require your involvement or approval. It's between James and me, professional to client." The sad distinction he drew between their personal relationship and this practical collaboration challenged Celine's tendency to view situations as all-or-nothing propositions. Before she could formulate a response, the front door opened, and James appeared using a walker, but moving with more confidence than she'd seen since his surgery. "Celine," he called, genuinely pleased by her unexpected visit. "Come see what Kieran's team has accomplished inside. The bathroom is completely transformed, but they preserved all the original tilework I was concerned about losing." James's enthusiasm was unmistakable, his academic mind clearly engaged by the technical challenges and creative solutions the renovation presented. As he guided Selene through the modifications, pointing out how each addressed specific needs while respecting the home's historic character, she observed something she hadn't fully appreciated before: her father's deep desire to maintain independence, his fear of becoming a burden to her, his need to remain in the space that contained decades of memories with her mother. The renovation Kieran had designed honored these emotional requirements as carefully as the physical ones. The residential elevator was disguised within existing architectural features, maintaining the home's aesthetic while providing essential accessibility. The expanded bathroom incorporated medical necessities without resembling a hospital room. Throughout the house, subtle modifications created safety without suggesting disability or dependence. When they reached James's study, Celine found it transformed into a temporary bedroom that would allow him to remain surrounded by his books during the initial recovery phase. A specially designed desk accommodated both his academic work and the medical monitoring equipment he would temporarily require. "Kieran understood immediately what I couldn't articulate," James explained, settling carefully into his favorite chair. "That I needed this house to remain a home, not become a sick room. That maintaining my identity as a scholar matters as much to my recovery as proper cardiac care." The observation illuminated something essential about Kieran's approach: not imposing solutions based on technical requirements alone, but seeking to understand the human experience within the spaces he created. It was the same insight he'd applied to the children's hospital design, the quality that had initially drawn Celine to his perspectives beyond their personal connection. "He presented these plans to me, not to you," James continued, his perceptiveness cutting through unstated questions. "Offering his professional expertise directly, one caregiver to another. No presumption of speaking for you or determining your responsibilities." The clarification shifted Celine's understanding of Kieran's actions, not overstepping boundaries or attempting to manage her family obligations, but offering specific skills where they could be useful while respecting her autonomy. The distinction represented a more sophisticated understanding of support than she'd previously experienced in relationships. "May I speak with you alone?" she asked her father after they'd completed the tour. James nodded, intuiting the conversation's importance. When they were private in his study, Celine voiced the question that had been forming since discovering Kieran's presence. "Did you arrange this deliberately? Getting him involved again?" I contacted an exceptional architect about necessary modifications to my home, James replied, his academic precision intentional rather than evasive. The fact that he happens to care deeply about my daughter was relevant primarily in that it ensured his thorough understanding of my specific needs. Dad. Celine's tone conveyed she wouldn't accept semantic deflection. James sighed, abandoning pretense. Yes, I reached out to Kieran specifically, not to manipulate your relationship, but because I genuinely needed his expertise. The fact that it might prompt you both to reconsider your separation was a secondary consideration. You had no right, Celine began, but James interrupted with uncharacteristic firmness. I had every right to seek the best solution for my circumstances, he countered. Kieran offered these plans without pressure or expectation. He's implemented them with complete professionalism. Any relationship implications are for you two to determine. The balanced assessment reflected her father's lifelong approach, respecting her independence while providing perspective she might not have considered. Celine found her initial indignation giving way to more nuanced reflection. He's been staying at the Riverside Inn, James added, his expression softening. Working remotely while overseeing the renovations, his team video conferences with him daily. He's created a temporary office in town to minimize disruption to his practice. The details revealed Kieran's commitment to both professional responsibility and personal values, maintaining his work obligations while honoring his promise to James, not abandoning either priority, but finding ways to integrate them meaningfully. When Celine left her father resting and returned to the garden, she found Kieran reviewing completed exterior modifications with the landscape architect. He excused himself when he saw her approach, his expression carefully neutral rather than expectant. The work is excellent, she acknowledged, professional appreciation providing safe conversational ground. Dad is clearly pleased with the results. That was the goal, Kieran replied simply. His recovery environment should support both physical healing and continued engagement with his academic interests. The statement echoed Celine's own philosophy about patient care, addressing the whole person rather than just the medical condition. Something shifted in her understanding as she recognized this fundamental alignment in their approaches to their respective professions and, by extension, to life itself. Would you have dinner with me tonight? She asked, the invitation representing more than a simple meal. There are things we should discuss. I'd like that, Kieran agreed, his tone revealing nothing of his expectations for such a conversation. That evening, they met at a small restaurant in Cedar Heights' historic district, a neutral location that minimized both painful memories and external pressures. Over a simple meal, they began the difficult process of honest communication about the fundamental fears that had driven their separation. I've been afraid, Selina finally admitted, setting aside the professional detachment she typically maintained. Not of you, but of needing you, of creating space in my life that only you can fill. Because of your mother? Kieran asked gently, demonstrating his understanding of her formative experience with loss. Partly. Celine traced the rim of her water glass, organizing thoughts she'd never fully articulated. I watched my mother die while my father held her hand every day for months. His love couldn't save her. Sometimes I think loving that completely only guarantees you'll feel the full measure of loss. Kieran listened without interrupting, giving her words the space they deserved. When she finished, he reached across the table, not to take her hand, but to lay his own palm up between them, an invitation rather than an assumption. The warranty on love has never been forever, he told her, his voice steady. It's just for today, renewed each morning, we choose it again. The simple framework, love as daily choice rather than permanent state, offered Celine a perspective she hadn't considered. Not guarantees of perpetual presence, but the intentional decision to remain connected through whatever circumstances arose. "When I saw what you'd done for my father," she continued, placing her hand in his offered one, "I realized something important. You weren't trying to take over or solve my problems. You were offering your specific gifts in service of someone important to both of us." "That's partnership," Kieran replied, his fingers gently closing around hers. "Not merging into one unit, but bringing our individual strengths to shared concerns." They talked for hours, the restaurant emptying around them as they navigated this new understanding of their relationship. Not seeking impossible certainties about the future, but establishing a framework for moving forward together that honored both their connection and their individual identities. When they finally left, walking through the quiet streets of Cedar Heights, Celine brought Kieran to the small community garden where she'd spent hours as a teenager following her mother's death. In the moonlight, medicinal herbs and flowers created patterns of silver and shadow. "I came here when grief felt unbearable," she explained, leading him along familiar paths. "Something about watching things grow, knowing plants heal and provide medicine. It helped me believe recovery was possible." The sharing of this private sanctuary represented a new level of trust, not just facts about her past, but the emotional landscapes that had shaped her. Kieran received the gift with appropriate gravity, understanding its significance in their evolving relationship. "Thank you for showing me this," he said simply, his arms slipping naturally around her waist as they stood among the healing plants. That night, they stayed at the Riverside Inn together, re-establishing physical intimacy with a depth enhanced by their emotional reconnection. Their lovemaking carried the tenderness of reunion and the passion of rediscovery, each touch affirming both the individual and the connection between them. In the morning, practical considerations reasserted themselves. Kieran's architectural practice required his attention. Celine's position at Mercy General awaited her return. James's rehabilitation would continue for months. Yet these logistical challenges no longer appeared as insurmountable obstacles, but rather as circumstances to be navigated together, each bringing their particular strengths to shared priorities. "I don't have perfect answers," Celine acknowledged, as they discussed immediate plans over breakfast. "I can't promise I won't sometimes need independence, won't occasionally retreat into professional detachment when emotions feel overwhelming." "I don't need perfect," Kieran replied, his hand covering hers on the table. "I just need real. The rest we figure out day by day." The framework, authenticity over perfection, process over fixed outcomes, offered something neither had fully experienced in previous relationships. Not the illusory safety of permanent guarantees, but the deeper security of knowing they would face inevitable changes and challenges together, bringing their whole selves to each new circumstance. As Selene prepared to return to her father's house, where James awaited her assessment of the renovation's practical functionality from a medical perspective, she paused at the door of Kieran's room. "Come with me," she said simply. "Dad would appreciate your presence for this evaluation." The invitation represented more than professional collaboration. It acknowledged Kieran's legitimate place in the family system they were creating, neither excluding him as an outsider nor depending on him as a savior. This balanced integration, honoring both connection and autonomy, marked the beginning of their deliberate partnership, not despite their individual strengths, but because of them. Chapter 10. Present tense. Today marks 1 year since Celine found Kieran in that rain-soaked alley. They stand together on the rooftop garden of the newly completed Children's Hospital wing, his design influenced by her insight, now a reality of glass and steel and growing things. Patients and families already fill the spaces below them, finding comfort in rooms designed to hold both suffering and hope. Celine's father has recovered enough to return to his own life, though his house now bears the thoughtful modifications Kieran designed. The reconciliation between Kieran and his father occurred unexpectedly at the hospital's opening ceremony, when the elder Matthews witnessed firsthand how his son's architectural vision had transformed hundreds of lives. As for Rebecca, her apologetic letter arrived last month. Kieran read it once, then let Celine burn it in their fireplace, the final ghost of his past reduced to harmless ash. The sunset bathes the garden in golden light as Kieran leads Celine to a secluded section, a small grove of cherry trees surrounding a bench inscribed with words from her mother's favorite poem. It's his gift to her, acknowledging both her loss and her capacity to transform that loss into compassion for others. He takes both her hands in his, drawing her close until their foreheads touch. "A year ago you found me broken," he whispers, his breath warm against her lips. "Not to fix me, but to remind me I was still whole beneath the breaking." His hand slides to the small of her back, pressing her body against his. Celine's fingers trace the line of his jaw, her eyes never leaving his. "And you showed me that loving someone doesn't mean losing myself," she responds, her voice thick with emotion. "It means finding parts of myself I never knew existed." The kiss that follows contains everything unspoken between them: hunger, gratitude, passion that has only deepened with each challenge overcome. His hands tangle in her hair as hers clutch the fabric of his shirt, their bodies remembering every intimate night they've shared. When they finally part, breathless, Kieran reaches into his pocket and presses something into her palm. It's a key, attached to a silver pendant shaped like the constellation under which they first met. "Not for tomorrow," he says, seeing the question in her eyes. "For tonight, for every night you choose to stay." Tears glimmer in Celine's eyes as she closes her fingers around the key, then pulls him back to her. "I choose now," she whispers against his mouth. "I choose you." As twilight descends, their silhouettes merge into one shadow among the cherry blossoms. The hospital thrums with life below them, each heartbeat, each breath, a testament to healing. Made possible. In this moment, their pasts no longer define them. There is only this present embrace, this current of desire flowing between them, this love that exists not in spite of their wounds, but because they trusted each other enough to reveal them. No promises of forever, no grand declarations about the future. Just the fierce certainty that right now, in each other's arms, they are exactly where they belong.